It's Sunday, April 14, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is the president of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, who filed a lawsuit last September to remove Donald Trump from the ballot in Colorado under the 14th Amendment. Noah Bookbinder, welcome to the Weekend Show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So you're a very brave man. Maybe I should start with that because, you know, Trump is about to go into a criminal trial tomorrow. He's very nervous about it, when he channels his nerves by abusing the judge and ignoring the gag order. And we know quite what he is to deal with if you are suing him or trying to, hold him to account. Just explain, before we get into the weeds of the news this week, about the intention behind that 14th Amendment and your decision to take that case forward, which ultimately was overturned by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so I think we have to start with the fact, and it's a fact that I think a lot of people and a lot of institutions in this country are sort of trying to pretend is not a fact. But the fact was that Donald Trump lost an election and tried to keep himself in power despite having lost, which is just about the most dangerous thing that can happen in a democracy. So that's something that happened. He tried to do it, ultimately, including by inciting a violent mob to attack the Capitol. And we looked at that and said, there must be something that can be done. There are a lot of people looking to see what could be done to bring about some accountability, but really to protect the country from somebody who would do such a thing and could do it again. And one of the things that our lawyers and some other lawyers found is that it wasn't the first time that the country was in this situation. That coming out of the Civil War, the drafters of the 14th Amendment, they did a lot of things that people remember very well. They added equal protection of the law. They obviously outlawed slavery. But they also did this other thing, which was not obscure at the time. It was a big part of the debate, but has largely been forgotten, which is that they put in this provision that says that if you're somebody who has sworn an oath to support the Constitution and then engaged in insurrection against it, so insurrection against the Constitution, you are disqualified from state or federal office. And the idea was, this country had just been through this horrific war. And the idea was to say that people who launched an insurrection against the Constitution and the democratic form of government shouldn't be put back in charge of that government. It's sort of a simple concept. It makes a lot of sense. And then for 150 years or so, nobody acted on that because thankfully there weren't any insurrections in this country. And we started to look at that and to say, maybe as in a lot of other ways, the framers of the Constitution were prescient and saw that something like this could happen. That they probably didn't imagine it would be 150 years in the future, but they saw that, and we thought that it applied in this instance, and so we set out to see if we could make that a reality. And we actually first represented New Mexico residents who brought an action against a guy named Coup Griffin, who was a county commissioner in New Mexico. He was someone who was an organizer of the January 6th insurrection and then was on the steps of the Capitol with a bullhorn spurring people on. There was a trial, and Griffin was determined to have engaged in insurrection, and he was removed from office. And by the time that wrapped up, Donald Trump was getting in position to run for president again. And Congress had failed to do the things that they could have done to protect against the same people doing the same things. And it seemed like, this constitutional provision, which was meant for exactly this situation, was crucial to try to apply, and specifically to apply to the person who was, ultimately responsible for this whole thing that had happened. So I can stop there. There's a lot more to be said about that.
Right.
But
I mean, I suppose the difficulty for not just myself, but probably everybody watching is we watched the insurrection play out on television. We watched it live. In fact, he watched it live as well once he'd finished making his speech, and then he got driven back to the dining room and watched the TVs in the White House and did nothing for 3 hours other than relish the moment because they were ultimately doing this in his name. I've always seen the insurrection as two kind of events. There's the insurrection to me that is the fake electors scheme, that trying to get the election overturned because he'd lost and he didn't want to lose. And so this was the scheme he'd concocted. And then when that failed, it was then sending in his base, the mob. Do you see them as separate, or does insurrection kind of encompass the one entirely terrible day?
Sure. I mean, I think as a legal matter, our view is that there has to be some component of violence for it to qualify as insurrection under the Constitution. That doesn't have to be the whole thing, but it has to be a component of it. But that said, certainly as we conceived of it and as we pled it in this action, it was broader. It was a wide-ranging scheme to keep himself in power, culminating in a violent attack. So I do think they are of a piece. I think a point that came out of the hearings that the January 6th Select Committee in Congress held that I certainly hadn't focused on before they shined a bright light on it was this chronology that I think it was December 19th, 2020, where there was this meeting in the White House with a whole bunch of internal and external attorneys, as well as I think the guy from Overstock.com.
That's right, Giuliani.
Exactly. Yeah. Where essentially over the course of this meeting, the news is delivered to Donald Trump that these other tactics are unlikely to get anywhere. And that night, he sends out this email, which is the one that says, "We'll be wild, come to DC on January 6th, we'll be wild." And I think the thing that those hearings helped to make clear is that January 6th wasn't a thing until that tweet went out. And, that there were different demonstrations on different dates that were planned. But that crystallizes the idea that his supporters are going to come out on January 6th and they are going to get wild and that becomes this insurrection. So it is when he learns that these other pieces are not likely to work that he shifts his tactics. So I think, when you sort of think that through, these really are of a piece. This is a single scheme, even if it's got different pieces to it.
Yeah, it's very much out of, I think of it as like Batman and Gotham City and him being one of many baddies that we read about in comics, because it's as bad as that. I mean, even the guy who we can never remember the name of from Overstock.com, isn't his name Patrick Byrne, I think?
I think that's right.
Yeah. I mean, these people were absolutely central to this scheme, flying all over the country to bring about this fake electors scheme. Like it was so well planned, albeit badly executed, and then obviously it failed. But the point being that the way I see it, because the US is such a litigious country, I mean, where I'm from and possibly elsewhere in Europe, they would have gone, well, yeah, there was an insurrection. We saw it on television. Everybody saw it. So of course he's going to be tried for it. Like, there would be no doubt. Why is it that here in the US, it's like, it's almost so theatrical. He's a former reality TV show host. Everything is like, it's almost pretend. So nobody really gets held to account.
That's right. I mean, I think you can look at it in two different ways. One way of looking at it is that actually every decision-making body that has substantively looked at this issue of was there an insurrection and did Donald Trump engage in insurrection has found that there was, and he did. That includes the trial court in our case in Colorado, the Colorado Supreme Court. It includes a court in Illinois that looked at the same question, including looking at the trial record from Colorado. It includes the Secretary of State of Maine, who reached the same conclusion, looking at a very similar record. And actually, nothing in that Supreme Court decision that came out changed that. The Supreme Court didn't say he didn't do it. There's not there are 3 opinions from different justices. There's not a sentence in there that even suggests that he didn't do it, that there was something wrong with the factual and legal determination made on that issue by the Colorado Supreme Court. Instead, they let him off on a technicality. They say that
this is the issue about the officer, about whether it's officers that are relevant or not.
Well, that was the issue that the trial court in Colorado used. The Supreme Court picked a different off-ramp, I think I'd say maybe slightly less embarrassing one, which is...
It's all semantics, isn't it?
Yeah, which is, they say essentially that a state can only rule on this issue of whether somebody is disqualified if Congress first legislates and says that states can do that. They say that, the Constitution didn't give that authority to states. When you sort of drill down, it's a pretty weird decision, because ultimately there's nothing that is different as far as how this provision was to be enforced than the provisions in those same post-Civil War amendments that say that slavery is eliminated, that say that people are entitled to equal protection of law. And yet nobody has suggested that the states can't enforce those unless Congress passes a law. But in this one particular case, they sort of invented an additional requirement that kind of, I guess, intuitively makes some sense, other than the fact that it's not actually in the Constitution. So they came up with this kind of technical way out for him. But they didn't say he didn't do it, even though he asked them to. Actually a couple of weeks after their decision, the case of Couey Griffin, that New Mexico guy, came before them, and they decided not to take that one up, which would have been another opportunity for them to, in a sort of quieter, more low-key way, to exonerate Donald Trump. They could have said this wasn't an insurrection. They could have said, well, unless you were personally violent, which Couey Griffin wasn't, just like Donald Trump wasn't, you haven't engaged in insurrection. They didn't do any of those things. So, we're still in this place where everybody that has actually looked at the issue has found that he did it. So that's in the sort of, actual official proceedings among people who have trials and listen to witnesses and look at the evidence. And as you pointed out, actually, we all saw it. But then there's this separate thing going on in the political world where, Donald Trump sets out an alternate reality.
Yeah.
And everybody who is, who supports him, and, he's the most powerful figure in the Republican Party, and that party has lined up behind him. So they all essentially agree to pretend that his alternate reality is real.
But to the extent that they claim that January 6th was just tourists and was a tour of the Capitol building, and I mean, to the point that, it's almost like they try to make you think that your eyes are deceiving you.
That's right.
And it's that much that makes you realize how far down the rabbit hole people are with him, whether it be because they're in a cult and they're brainwashed, or just political allegiance because he has compromat, or he's going to humiliate them or not support their re-election. This, to me, it just goes back to comic books, because this stuff just doesn't seem like it could be real. And yet, again, the US does seem to operate, and I only say this as an outsider with a European perspective, is that nothing is what it seems here. And you really do, like, everybody lawyers up, because, there's an argument and a perspective and an interpretation, whether it be of the Constitution or in this case, whether or not this thing really happened. I mean, how do you feel having gone through this process and taking the position that you take, knowing that this man has effectively won the nomination to be the Republican presidential candidate once again?
I think what's really alarming is that we're in a situation where institution after institution has decided to take a pass on holding him accountable and on kind of protecting all of us as Americans from this person who attacked the country and not only could do it again, but has kind of made clear that in the same circumstance, he would do it again. And so, that started weeks after January 6th when the House impeached Donald Trump and the Senate acquitted him, even though you could clearly get to 67, the number you needed to convict, if you counted up the number of people who said he was responsible for an insurrection. But they came up with reasons not to do it, that, he was going to be out of office. There was no further threat. Later
how naive.
Right. And, later on, the House Republicans, killed efforts to have a bipartisan commission. Agencies like the Federal Election Commission repeatedly gave Donald Trump a pass. And then you got to this Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court, essentially what happened in that case, I think it's almost an inescapable conclusion if you read this sort of very weird opinion they came up with, is they just didn't want to do it. I think they understood that the facts and the law supported finding him disqualified. They just felt like there would be so much blowback and it would be very divisive, and they just didn't want to do that.
But that's their job, Noah. That's the whole point. That is their job. And this was this was 9 justices, no dissent. That must have felt like a real kind of kick in the teeth.
In the end, it wasn't, I think, ultimately totally surprising, in the sense that we knew this was an extraordinary thing to ask a court to do, to say that the person who is former president of the United States, the leading Republican candidate, is disqualified and has to be removed from the ballot. And
despite being caught on tape.
Yeah.
Despite it happening.
Would have been extraordinary. There would have been massive backlash. Now, I continue to think that in terms of disruption, that actually would have been the least disruptive way to resolve this situation. But it would have been very disruptive, and it would have been directed at that court. And you look at, it points out just how courageous those 4 justices of the Colorado Supreme Court were to take the position that they did, understanding all that blowback, which they got. And
theirs was very well written as well, wasn't it? A lot of people said that was, was very buttoned down. The way that they had approached the argument was very well intended.
Absolutely right. It was an extraordinary decision where they went one by one through these legal issues. I think they really tried to convey in that decision, and I think they were successful, that this was pretty straightforward. These are not ultimately difficult calls if you look at them. One of the things that we saw when the case went before the Supreme Court was this absolutely extraordinary set of amicus briefs, friend of the court briefs from people who were not parties in the case. And on the one side, on Donald Trump's side, you had essentially just one after another Republican elected official or sets of elected officials and other sort of, conservative and Republican, powerful people all saying exactly the same thing. And then on the other side, you had, legal scholars across the political spectrum. You had former Republican officials. You had, experts on, autocracy and democracy. You had, law enforcement officers, and this wide array of people from all walks of life who actually had expertise coming in and saying, this is really clear. And because the more I sort of started from a place of, this is going to be tough. And the more I looked at it, the more I concluded, as all of these folks did, that it's actually not that tough on the substance. It's only tough because it is hard to do. It's hard to, people are going to resist it. And
the climate is so polarized. I mean, that's the other thing. You're dealing with people who are, believers and non-believers, and it's never the twain shall meet. And getting anything done legally in this country on a kind of political level is so very difficult because of that. I mean, the fact that judges are political, again, that came as a shock to me when I first came here. I was like, well, what do you mean the judges are elected? And it didn't make any sense. And so for me, I can understand how difficult it is to get justice based on that. But I just want to ask very quickly about how your organization came under a lot of criticism because, you claim to be nonpartisan, which is totally understandable. But obviously those who were not very happy about what had gone on started to accuse you of being radical and a left-wing activist group and all of this kind of stuff. I mean, that surely isn't very helpful when you are trying to, have a kind of broad scope across the political spectrum.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think one of the key points is that Crew, our organization, we were lawyers in the case, and we helped to spearhead the case, and we brought it with this very talented, actually bipartisan group of lawyers. But we brought it on behalf of 6 people from Colorado, and they were these Republican and unaffiliated voters who were affected directly by the Republican primary. And they're really an extraordinary group. Norma Anderson, who is the named plaintiff, in Trump v. Anderson, she's the Anderson, is a 90-year-old career Republican politician. She was the majority leader, the Republican majority leader of the Colorado State Senate and the Colorado State House. Several times she was in both of those positions. She was the first woman to have either of those positions. And Krista Kafer, who is one of the plaintiffs, is a conservative columnist for the Denver Post. And she's not sort of a little bit conservative. She's actually very conservative if you read her columns. Claudine Schneider was one of those plaintiffs. She was a Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Rhode Island years back, but she's lived in Colorado for decades. These were not a bunch of Washington liberals. These were conservatives from Colorado who think the Constitution is important and think that Donald Trump poses a risk. And they are people who did this at enormous cost to themselves. These are people who, in many cases, were part of the Republican conservative community, and would go to church or to their supermarket and see the backlash head on. So they were, in terms of being brave. I mean, those people are about as brave as it gets.
So let's talk about that separation of partisan affiliation and constitutional ethics. Why do people fail to see the republic as more important than this disgraced former president? I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I try, to talk about wanting to, be pro-democracy and save democracy. And, it's not about being a fan of Joe Biden or voting for Joe Biden. It's about wanting this system of government to remain as it currently stands. And yet the partisan element is now so extreme that people can't separate themselves from wanting the country to survive as a whole. That must be something you grapple with quite a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that has been actually heartening in the last couple of years has been, the instances of really, I think, brave and inspiring Republicans who have said that I may agree with the Republican Party and with Donald Trump on policy issues, but standing for democracy is more important. People like Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, like the plaintiffs in our case, like Norma Anderson. And there are more than a few of those people. And it's been, really inspiring and a pleasure for me to get to know some of those people and to work with them. But on the flip side, you also have this large number of people for whom their political party has become entirely about allegiance to one man and not to, conservative economic policy, a certain set of social policies, which you can agree with or disagree with. But, there's a place in the political spectrum for people to take those positions. And that's all gone out the window. And the sort of governing structure of that party has lined itself up completely behind Donald Trump. And I think that's incredibly, incredibly dangerous because you're right. It's not, it is, I think that this country works pretty well when there are two viable or more, if, viable, meaningful political parties. And so, we certainly don't set ourselves up saying that like we are pushing for the victory of this one party over the other. We want a working democratic system, and that, trying to keep Donald Trump off the ballot is not about helping one political party over another. It's about protecting the republic from somebody who has attacked it and could attack it again and really is a danger to the viability of a meaningful democracy in America.
Okay, I want to talk about the potential for him attacking it again in just a minute. We have to take a quick break, but we'll come back with Noah Bookbinder next. We often think living a more heart-healthy life means making big, unsustainable changes. Well, with Superbeats Heart Chews, you can get daily blood pressure support in just 2 tasty chews a day, and they even promote heart-healthy energy without the stimulants. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the antioxidants in Superbeats are clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone. I know how much heart health is linked to other health issues, and I do my best to make good choices. Superbeats Heart Chews are part of my morning routine. Super convenient, I chew them whilst catching up with the morning news. They're effective and clinically studied. Superbeats is the #1 doctor, pharmacist and cardiologist recommended beet brand for cardiovascular health support. They are entirely plant-based with no artificial sweeteners or colours. Double your potential with Superbeats Heart Chews. Get a free month supply of Superbeats Heart Chews on all bundles and a free full-size bag of turmeric chews, valued at $25 with your order by going to weekendbeats.com. Get this exclusive offer only at weekendbeats.com. I've always found it difficult to find clothes that I like to wear, and when I find one thing that works, I just buy loads of them and just wear the same thing all the time. Well, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, zips, and polos. You'll never have to worry about what to wear when you've got the Rhone commuter collection. The comfortable 4-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work or your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love a technical fabric, something that is advanced and uses technology to make a more comfortable and more modern outfit. Now, the commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So head to rhone.com/Anthony and use promo code Anthony to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/Anthony and use code Anthony, ANTHONY. It's time to find your corner office comfort. We're back on the weekend show with Noah Bookbinder. I'm Anthony Davis. This week, Noah, a GOP resolution said that Trump didn't engage in an insurrection. The resolution was introduced now more than 3 years after the insurrection, and it added that Trump did not give aid or comfort to enemies of the U.S. The resolution carries no legal authority. It's more of a symbolic gesture, but it was sponsored by Matt Gaetz and co-sponsored by more than 60 House Republicans. I mean, we've, just been talking about this allegiance, this idea that they put one solitary man over the party and over the safety of the citizens and the future of the republic. Did you see this resolution as just, theater, political theater, or do you think it has any value that 60 Republicans have put their name to it?
I mean, it certainly is telling that a large number of, these aren't sort of just people who are Republicans. These are elected members of the United States Congress, are willing not only to put loyalty to one person ahead of the protection of the democracy, but they're willing to make an attack on the facts, on the things that we all saw with our own eyes, a cornerstone of their political identity and their program going forward. They're not talking about conservative economic policy or things like, they are relitigating this event that, not only have there been cases like ours where, there was a trial with 15 witnesses and thousands of documents and hours of video where fact finders said, hey, this case proved that he engaged in insurrection, and Donald Trump had lawyers who were aggressive and they put up their own witnesses. Not only have, through a whole lot of process, courts and others reached that conclusion, but also we all watched it on television. It's not a hard case. And
we keep coming back to that, don't we? Like we keep coming back to the videotape and the funny thing is it was the insurrectionists that filmed it.
Yeah.
It wasn't even filmed by the networks. This was like homemade video. And so that's why it feels like we're living in the Twilight Zone, doesn't it? That's
right. I mean, and that was one of the wild things in this trial that we did in New Mexico for Couey Griffin. It would be hilarious if it wasn't so deadly serious for the Republic. But a sort of lesson of that trial is, don't take a videographer to an insurrection. I mean, this guy actually brought a filmmaker with him who took hours and hours and hours of footage that showed exactly what happened. And ultimately it was very, very damning. And so the only way around it ultimately is to deny reality. And that's a dangerous place for a democracy to be.
You talked about them putting their allegiance to one man. People don't really like to define what that is in this country, do they? I mean, maybe we could just flesh out what that really is. That is authoritarianism. That is the makings of a dictatorship. That is an autocrat seeking worship. I mean, obviously the press kind of talk about it, and he did that ridiculous quote, I'll be a dictator for day one or one day or, whatever. But the evidence was pretty clear from his last presidency. And I often cite disappearing people on the streets of Portland in unmarked vehicles, unknown military personnel arresting peaceful protesters or buzzing protesters in Lafayette Square with a helicopter and using tear gas on American citizens. I mean, if that isn't the stuff of dictatorship, I don't know what is. But this concept that America, maybe it's American exceptionalism that says, oh, we could never fall to a dictator. And yet that is happening on television as well. Like we are seeing that as well. Even his criticism of the judge and the judge's daughter in tomorrow's trial. I mean, that is also the makings of an autocrat who refuses to be controlled by the judiciary. Am I going mad? That's what it sounds
not
like.
at all. Not at all. I mean, these are the conversations that we have to have where you sound like a crazy person just reciting the facts.
Right.
Donald Trump, over the course of 4 years, chipped away at checks and balances in our system, chipped away at democratic norms. You don't even have to look for the sort of quieter, more secret stuff. He publicly fired U.S. attorneys, prosecutors, and inspectors general, the sort of internal watchdogs within the government, when they pursued investigations that were unfavorable to him, or didn't pursue investigations that he wanted politically. He pushed his Justice Department to drop cases against friends and allies and bring investigations against people that he perceived to be enemies. That stuff happened very publicly. Yeah. One of the things that our organization has specialized over the last 8-9 years is sort of finding these obscure pieces of law that were largely forgotten, but that became very relevant under Donald Trump. And along with the disqualification clause of the 14th Amendment, another one of those is a law called the Hatch Act, which says that you can't use, aside from people like the president, a few people who are set out by law, you can't use official government positions for politics, for somebody's election. And we ended up filing dozens and dozens of complaints because it became essentially the official policy of the Trump White House that everybody used their official position to boost his reelection, to attack his opponents. And this little office that usually nobody pays any attention to, that administers that law, was finding dozens and dozens of violations, was recommending that Kellyanne Conway be fired, and again, these seem little as an individual matter, but you add them together, it was collecting the sort of the impact and power of the federal government and using it to keep somebody in power, which is the stuff of authoritarianism.
But that's before we even talk about the theft of classified documents, under the Espionage Act. That's before we even talk about the 1.2 million people who died of COVID. And half of those lives could have been saved if the guy had taken it more seriously. I mean, it's almost like every possible conceivable law or event that you could write in a movie script about the president going AWOL, he achieved. I mean, maybe that's the only great achievement of the Trump presidency, is breaking every law that is protocol for the role of the commander-in-chief.
I mean, look, we are not an electoral organization, and I don't get into who should be elected and who should not be elected. But we can certainly say that the abuses of power and the anti-democratic actions, mounted over those 4 years, and there has been very little accountability. And his statements over the past years have ramped up the extent to which he seems not only uninterested in checks and balances, but interested in tearing them down and eroding aspects of our democratic system. And that makes enforcing the laws that we do have for the things that have already happened all the more important.
Somebody wrote to me on Thursday and asked why, considering that 5 people died on January 6th, why Donald Trump could not be on trial for manslaughter. Is that something that could ever be a consideration?
I think that I will say that, particularly Jack Smith, the special counsel in that case, I think has done an extraordinary job under very, very difficult circumstances. And I think that that the calculus that he tried to engage in was to say that he wanted to charge really serious offenses, and he did. I mean, these were conspiracy to obstruct a government function, and a number of these these charges that carry significant penalties that sort of capture the general thrust of the conduct, but also charges that were going to be relatively straightforward and relatively easily provable.
Yeah.
Nothing's easy in this area because there's so, feelings are so fraught. It's so political. But the charges that he brought were ones that, sort of, if we lived in a kind of neutral world, it's sort of like what I was saying about our case under the 14th Amendment, these are not hard. The facts, not only the facts of what happened, but the facts of what Donald Trump did, are not hard to prove, and they map very closely over what these laws are that were charged. And I think that Jack Smith thought that he would be more successful charging those kinds of offenses as opposed to ones where, maybe you could get there, but it was going to be really, really difficult to put all the factual pieces and the legal pieces together to get there. And I think I am hopeful that case is actually going to go to trial, that it's going to go to trial this year. I think there are, the Supreme Court and others have put some obstacles in front of that happening. I think it is still very possible.
Well, like in presidential immunity, which, it's not a small one, is it? It's
not a small one. It is, it's an easy one. I mean, I think, even I thought our case was pretty straightforward, but immunity is a much easier question. It would be, if this court were to rule that the president has absolute immunity, then our democracy is in much worse shape than I even worry that it is right now. I think it's ultimately going to be, even for this court, pretty easy. I think the issue is more one of timing. And I think if they can move pretty quickly after an oral argument, as they did in the Colorado case, and say, of course, he's not absolutely immune, then there is plenty of time might be stretched, but there is certainly sufficient time for that case to go forward, for it to go forward in a fair and thorough way. I think if that happens, it's going to be a devastatingly powerful case. To the extent people are paying attention to it, it will make even more clear than the many, many things we've already seen, how horrific this was and how much he's responsible for it.
But what's problematic, though, is that those people who are in the cult of Trump, it will only cause them to double down on their admiration for him and support of him, especially when he's pushing language like, it's Biden has brought this about. He's now using the phrase election interference, which is ironic at the very least. I mean, even the fact that he's allowed to say those things, to me, constitutes some kind of a break of not just protocol, but also criminality, to kind of claim that it's Joe Biden behind it, because he obviously ran his Justice Department like it was his own personal legal firm, and to project that onto Joe Biden, who's been a public servant his whole life. I mean, it is very, there is so much there that suggests that he's just ignoring the whole system. So no matter what cases you bring towards him, he just seems to either be able to delay, or because he has such tunnel vision about his view, he comes out with arguments that nobody else would really even think of.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, delay has always been his tactic. He's used that again and again. He's very good at it. And I think you're right that a lot of his supporters are just with him. And so they will adopt whatever kind of counterfactual presentation he puts out there. I also think that there's a pretty significant swath of the American people that maybe just hasn't focused in a while on these really dangerous things that Donald Trump did, and that when these cases are put in front of them, we'll actually be troubled by it.
Yes.
And we'll see what happens. But that is my That's my belief. I do think that these judges in these cases are put in a very difficult position because you're right that having a defendant in a case out there arguing the facts of the case publicly, sort of defaming the judge and the prosecutor and
the juries, potentially.
And witnesses. Obviously, that can't happen in a justice system. At the same time, shutting down the speech of a major political leader is a fraught and sort of unfortunate place to go
That's the elephant in the room,
system.
though, isn't it, Noah? It's the office of president that people can't get their heads around. This respect for the office of president. Despite the fact that he didn't respect the office of president even when he was the president, there is this overarching idea that you cannot disrespect a former president in this way. And that is a cultural thing. I mean, it's not really constitutional, is it?
Oh, that's certainly right. I mean, if anything, if you go back to the framers of the Constitution, one of the one of the key principles that they, I think, believed to the core and worked hard to put into our Constitution is that this is not a monarchy, that this is a country that had just rebelled against a monarchy, and that I think they came reluctantly to the idea that we needed a chief executive to have sort of order in this country. There had been sort of an experiment with the Articles of Confederation, which didn't have a strong president. And, they determined that ultimately you needed something like that, but they were very determined that person be a regular person who was not above the law, not outside of the law, and not somebody who was who received excessive deference. And I think in a lot of ways they'd be horrified by Donald Trump's notion that the president can do whatever he wants and the people need to defer to that, and the fact that so many Americans have gone along with that because it's not the way the system was designed.
I was thinking back about, previous presidents that have got into hot water. There's only really Nixon and Clinton, right? And, Nixon we know about, who was forced to resign. But Clinton, lying about sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky, I mean, at the time, that seemed like the worst thing that could ever possibly happen. There was so much shame. And yet we're talking about like consensual sex between two adults. This now, considering that, we've got him, the hush money, paying off a porn star and, a whole kind of gamut of potential crimes. And yet there doesn't seem to be that same shame attached to Donald Trump as Bill Clinton seems to still carry when you see him walking around these days.
I mean, shame is an important context, and it's tied up with things like norms, like this is how we do things, this is how we don't do things. So even in the case of Richard Nixon, he was only forced to resign in the sense that it became clear to him that he would be impeached and likely be convicted. And, the sort of with sort of regular rules of decorum, at that point, it is, the right thing to do is just to resign and not bring the country to that point. Donald Trump introduced this concept of what if you just ignored the rules, and what if you just ignored the traditions and the ways things have been done in the past. And
morality as well, because morality is linked to shame, isn't it?
I think that's right. Ethics is obviously, it's what we think about every day. Right. And, his sort of argument on any sorts of rules or any sorts of concept of ethics is sort of make me, right? And, one of the things we found is that in a lot of cases, things that we thought were rules weren't rules. They were really just traditions. And if somebody didn't want to do it, they didn't have to do it. And even where there were rules and laws, they're very, very hard to enforce. In some cases, because enforcement isn't written into it. In some cases, because there's so much partisanship in the system that even where there are potential enforcement mechanisms, it's hard to make them work. And that's been a lot of his strategy, is just to essentially pretend the rules and the laws don't exist and put them to their paces and see if they can actually be brought to bear. And it turns out it's really hard. And, one of the things that we and others in the sort of good government space were focused on over the past 4 years was, are there ways that we can strengthen the laws and the rules so that they do work when somebody is not interested in following them? And, there were certainly some notable successes, mostly pretty quiet successes. But the sort of large scale reform came up just a little shy, I think in large part because of the level of partisanship that we have. And so, our system is still vulnerable and those reforms are still needed.
How much is the insanity clause relevant in this case? Because, I've interviewed on this show Bandy Lee a few times, who is the clinician, the forensic psychiatrist who effectively diagnosed him as being a malignant narcissist and talks about his personality disorder and everything else. I mean, he is undoubtedly very, very compromised mentally, emotionally. And, there doesn't seem to be any real provisions for that in the Constitution, to the point, or even an interest on behalf of the politicians and even the media to talk about the mental health of the former president in any detail whatsoever. Maybe a passing glance, but I could talk about it endlessly. I mean, why do the legal people stay away from it? When Dr. Lee said to me, she's in court all the time talking about criminals who are, having their cases heard for parole or whatever else. And this is scientific. This does have a legal connection. And yet on this subject, no one really goes there.
Yeah, I'm going to probably frustrate you a little bit in saying that's pretty far outside of, my expertise and my,
Sure.
That I can look at it and say that he has been doing things that are illegal, that he has been doing things that are, that trend authoritarian, that are dangerous to the democracy. I have less of a basis to say, why, what is it in him that pushes him to that place? I think in the criminal cases, intent is definitely an issue, right? And so one of the things that we may see if Jack Smith's January 6th related case is able to get to trial, similarly with the case in Georgia, is his lawyer saying, well, he actually thought he won. And so he thought this was proper.
Yeah.
I don't ultimately think that's a great defense, because even if
it's been disproven already, hasn't it? By Bill Barr and everybody. They've already.
I think that's right. The evidence is overwhelming that he was told again and again that he didn't win, and that he admitted in private conversation that he knew that. But even so, you're not allowed to say, I think I won, I exhausted my legal remedies, and now I'm going to break the law to keep myself in power. That still wouldn't work. But I also think that his own team doesn't want to say that he was in an alternate reality, and so I think that there will actually be a limit to how much we see that piece play a role in court. As to sort of what his actual mental state is, I really can only look at what he's doing and how dangerous it is.
But there is a scientific term which we are able to use, and that is that he's nuts. And you can feel it, I can feel it, and anybody who lives in reality can feel it. And I find it fascinating that we're living in a society now where we're all being much more open about our mental health and boasting about our therapists and everything else, right? And yet, when the president is nuts, it's like the world's worst kept secret. So, how do you go forward when society is evolving and being more open about mental health, and somebody who is so clearly unwell is put on a pedestal and the Supreme Court is siding with? I mean, it's very frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll, again, sort of acknowledging that the mental health piece is sort of outside of my realm, I will say that the extent to which institutions that are key to safeguarding our democracy are willing to ignore what happened and what he did again and again and again is a really dangerous place to be. And we have seen that, most pointedly, obviously around the attempt to keep himself in power after the election and around the January 6th insurrection, but also again and again. And one of the things that's been interesting for us, when we started with Donald Trump's, when Donald Trump was sworn in, what we were really focused on was the kind of financial corruption and the conflicts of interest, which was clear from day one that was going to be happening. And
that he hadn't divested from the Trump organization. Exactly.
And it happened, and it was worse than we ever imagined it could be.
Right. Do you remember when he wheeled in the papers, the stack of blank pages, and claimed that was everything that he was not looking at anymore?
Exactly. But one of the things that we found in just the last few weeks is there's suddenly a lot of interest in that because, we've been, as other people have been pointing out that, hey, he's now got this publicly traded company, right, and very wealthy people and foreign governments and folks who want to influence him can buy shares, prop that up. That directly affects his wealth. And that's a way to influence him. And I think part of the reason why it's getting traction now is because it's outrageous. But part of the reason it's getting traction is because everybody had kind of forgotten that was a thing that happened.
That's so interesting.
And so, I think we are seeing that with so much about him is that people have sort of decided to pretend that he is a normal political figure. And as these things come out that are highly abnormal and highly problematic, people are kind of discovering them again. And it's a very strange place to be.
It's lost 25% of its value in the last 5 days. So if the trajectory continues in that direction, he will have probably lost a lot of money. And I think he's relying on that money to pay legal bills as well, going forward. We have to take another quick break, but I want to come back and talk about this idea that, history could repeat itself. And if he loses the election, how he may react to that. And if another insurrection is on the horizon. We'll do that next on The Weekend Show. Sick of the one-size-fits-all method, especially when it comes to your erectile dysfunction treatment? Well, good news. Now you've got options with Hims. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to doctor-trusted ED treatment options such as chewable hard mints, brand-name treatments like Viagra, or generic alternatives for up to 95% off. The process is simple and 100% online, no uncomfortable doctor's visits. Just answer a series of simple questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you for free. No insurance is needed. If ED is getting you down, it's time to join the hundreds of thousands of trusted Hims subscribers and get treated. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/weekend. That's HIMS.com/weekend for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/weekend. Hard mints are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Prices vary based on product and subscription plan. I'm excited to tell you about Moink. That's Moo plus Oink. Moink is a meat subscription box company on a mission to fight for the family farm. They're located in rural America, run by an 8th-generation female farmer. Their animals are raised humanely, their employees are paid a living wage, and the quality of their product is better than anything you'll find in a store. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon straight to your door. I've received one of these boxes, and I can verify that the quality of the food was excellent, and it tasted delicious too. Keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/weekend now, and listeners of this show get free bacon for a year. That's 1 year of the best bacon you'll ever taste, but for a limited time. Spelled MOINK box.com/weekend. That's moinkbox.com/weekend. No, Bookbinder, do you worry that this whole insurrection story could happen again? Donald Trump, might be neck and neck in the polls. As we know, polls tend to be conducted over landline telephones with older people. So who knows where this election is going? But there is a good chance that actually he's not as popular as he thinks he is, and not as popular as he tells us he is. His base is shrinking. The criminal trials don't help. And he could lose the election, some say, by quite a large margin. He won't accept that, though, will he? And he certainly won't go quietly. So should we not be planning for another insurrection and managing the situation to protect the nation?
I think it is a near certainty that if Donald Trump loses the election, no matter whether it's close or it's not close, he will assert that he actually won the election. He's come pretty close to saying that. And I think even more troubling, powerful members of Congress and others have said that they are not committing to abide by the results of the election if Donald Trump doesn't win. Elise Stefanik, who sort of initially was perceived as a moderate Republican from New York. She's now, very closely aligned with Donald Trump, but has specifically said that.
She'll be the VP pick, incidentally. Just a small prediction there. Yeah.
Certainly could be. Yeah. And so, I think that that's part of why I was saying earlier that I think actually the Supreme Court having ruled him disqualified was one of the least disruptive ways, as disruptive as it would have been, to resolve this, danger that is posed by somebody who has been an insurrectionist running for president again. If he does not win, I think he almost certainly will assert that he in fact won. And he's got a large number of supporters, both very powerful office holders and regular people, primed to believe that and to potentially act on that. I do think that there are some situations that hopefully will make it possible to respond to that situation. One is that, one of the reforms that did happen is that the Electoral Count Act, which governs sort of how this process works of the Electoral College voting and then those results being counted, that was strengthened. Some, not all, but some of the ambiguity in that law has been cleared up. That'll make it a bit harder to do some of the things that Donald Trump tried to do the first time around. Also, Joe Biden is president. And so, federal law enforcement response should there be unrest, is not going to be totally up to Donald Trump. Yeah. So, there are some of those pieces, but it's unlikely to be pretty if that is the circumstance. And I think that's something that we, as a country, need to be ready for. So I think that is, that's not just sort of a thing that conceivably could happen. It's a thing that it's hard to imagine that some version of it won't happen if he doesn't win the election.
Some of us have been saying that January 6, 2021 was the rehearsal, and what's going to come this time will be, way more powerful because they learnt their lessons the last time. And the difference, I suppose, as you describe, is he's not the incumbent. So there doesn't need to be a transition of power and, like get that guy out and watch him take those boxes with him. So do you think that, and also then, of course, there's the criminal trials. I mean, he could be running for president from a federal prison cell. So, there's so much there. But as with dictators who have a cult-like following, people will just go with him wherever he goes. And so that's really compounding this. He's been saying that the election is rigged against him for the last few years. And after a while, as we know with, Hitler's repetition, it starts to become part of the vernacular.
Yeah, I mean, one of the we've heard over the last number of years from a lot of experts in democracy and totalitarianism and the fall of democracy, and that's I'm not a historian. I have to rely on those folks, but one of the things that they have said is that one of the most potent predictors of the rise of authoritarianism is an attempted takeover of power that is not that does not result in real accountability and right. That's not responded to effectively. And I don't think we haven't missed our chance on that yet. We've missed some chances.
It's getting close, though. I mean, we're only a few months away from an election. Is this criticism of Merrick Garland or of, the system? Because I'm as frustrated as many people that it's taking, over 3 years to even get to the point where he might be held to account. And it's not even looking good that it's going to happen. Surely in that delay, it does mean it gives credence to his argument.
I have been enormously frustrated by the delay. I think that Merrick Garland came into that position, I think, from a place of, in some ways, it was a sort of a noble position that I don't think was right, but I think it was well intentioned, that it is not, it can be harmful to a democracy to prosecute a former leader, and instead we should focus on returning the system to normalcy, making it work the way it should. Yeah. And I think he came around and ultimately did the right thing. He appointed a special prosecutor, put a good person into that position. Special prosecutor has been effective and aggressive and quick. And there's some extent to which maybe some of that back and forth was just necessary to ensure that, we weren't jumping the gun on something so consequential. But it's also been very frustrating because if that trial had happened a year ago, we might be in a very different place now.
Or even if he had been, his impeachment had been ratified in the Senate. Of course. I mean, the second impeachment I'm talking about, not the first one where he tried to extort Ukraine. That one is by the by now. I mean, this is the tragedy of the system, supposedly of checks and balances. They simply don't work.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have learned that they work when people are committed to them.
Yeah, and so they play by the rules.
Right. And so you had this situation where you had Mitch McConnell, who's a very smart person, who I think understands our system very well, saying Donald Trump is entirely responsible for this outrageous thing that happened and should be held accountable. And I'm going to vote to acquit him. And now Mitch McConnell has endorsed Donald Trump for president again. Yeah. That is not a system working the way that it's supposed to. On the flip side, you see people like Jack Smith, who has been, under enormous pressure and, very personal threats and insults from Donald Trump and many others. You see people like those members of those justices of the Colorado Supreme Court who are willing to, at real risk to themselves, like the plaintiffs in Colorado, to put themselves out there to make the system work. And, those are the sort of instances of courage that I fall back on, to think that, we're still in this. We still got a chance here. But it is harder than it ought to be.
Do you think it's an issue that the country is just so young? Because, the European nations and where I grew up, we have like thousands of years of history where the nation has fallen and risen, and there's been coups and takeovers and insurrections. And you learn from history, and a country evolves based on its experience. I mean, in the UK, we have a constitution that is unwritten. I mean, can you imagine that working here in the US? So is this just part of the American story?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of the flip side of that is this is, I think, the oldest continually functioning democracy in the world. And it's a country that has, I think we think of it as, Americans tend to think of it as, we put in place this democracy and that's it. That's like from that point on was to always be so. But that actually isn't the story as it has really played out. I mean, the country almost didn't make it through the Civil War. In times like the 1920s, there was a tremendous rise of extremism. We've been through periods of, very virulent conflict about race and other issues. And ultimately, American democracy has come through. I think it's being tested in a way that it has not been in at least a century. And I think the result is still, unwritten. It's still unclear. But I think it can make it. But in some ways, remembering that it hasn't always been easy and straightforward in the past, while that can be discouraging because nobody wants another civil war, God knows, but it also can be encouraging in the sense that this country has had real threats to democracy and to stability in the past and has found its way through them, and it's still possible to get there again.
Finally, what would you say to the Republicans who don't care for democracy? They've now changed their language on this subject. They argue that it's a constitutional republic, that we're not a democracy. It's almost like democracy is exclusively for Democrats, a bit like climate change, they do all that kind of progressive stuff. And now, Trump supporters interviewed at rallies are like, well, maybe we do need a dictator. Maybe that's what this country needs now. How do you feel when you hear those kind of responses?
Yeah, I mean, I think the extent to which people are maybe lukewarm in their commitment to democracy is very distressing. I think I have a couple responses to that. One is this idea that it's a republic, not a democracy. That's sort of nonsense, because the same the same actions that undercut democracy also undercut constitutional provisions. They undercut a republican form of government. A constitutional republic is no more a dictatorship than a democracy is. And so, nothing that Donald Trump has done or is proposing to do is consistent with a republic. So it's not a distinction without a difference in the sense that there are, republic is based on elected representatives rather than direct voting. But as to these issues, it's not a meaningful distinction. It's a sort of, it's a way to be against, to pick at a legitimate issue that is being raised. I think more serious is the fact that there are now Americans, including in some cases elected members of the Republican Party, who say that having a democratic system maybe isn't that important. And it's not necessarily just Republicans. And I think the key there is to take it down from these sort of abstract concepts of governance and instead to think about, what impacts regular people's lives. And that to the extent that people are worried about good health care, that people are worried about, drugs that are safe, medication that is safe, and roads and bridges that are safe, and
or water without PFAS in it, for example.
Water and effective law enforcement, but non-abusive law enforcement, and education for children, and just very basic things. If you have a system that is based on the people making a decision through their vote, there's a way to ensure that the system works for us. If we have a system instead that is ultimately determined by wealthy and powerful people putting who they want in power and doing the things that they want to do, it's not going to be responsive to regular people. And I think it is a challenge for people who work on issues of democracy to explain that in a way that is meaningful to people. Because of course, people, there's a lot that's broken in our democracy. There is too much influence of money. And I think and there's too much partisanship. And it's not an entirely irrational response to say this system is broken. We need something different. I think explaining to people why what we need is a better democracy as opposed to not a democracy is a challenge that we need to rise to.
But what's problematic with that argument is that it's only really Donald Trump who is saying that the system is broken. And actually Joe Biden is saying, let's just go back to normal. But normal systematically is pretty flawed, isn't it? So you've got this extremist view coming from Donald Trump where they want Project 2025 and no separation of church and state and creating this kind of Christian nation of warriors. And then you've got Joe Biden saying, let's just keep it as it is, but it's an imperfect system.
Yeah, and I think actually, when you sort of dig into the policy specifics, and Biden has been in favor of reform measures on voting and on money in politics, but there's certainly been a tone of sort of let's just go back to the way things were, and I do think
that's Trump's fault, though, isn't it? Because he's upped the ante so much that we're just desperate to go back to some sense of normality.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that it is a real challenge to say, hey, this system is broken in many ways, and we do need reforms, and that's what our organization was arguing for in 2015 before anybody knew that that democracy in the United States might be under threat. But we need reforms, but not throwing the system away, not throwing away representative democracy. And that's something that I think, especially with younger people, we collectively need to do a better job of explaining, why that is.
And how government works, maybe. And that just because politicians aren't even necessarily great communicators doesn't mean that their intentions aren't honorable. That's right.
And there's certainly plenty of people working in government who are not politicians, who are people who look to keep our water supply safe and our medication safe and all of those kinds of things. And you can't throw all of that out in the name of curbing some pieces that are not working as well as we would hope they would.
Okay. We have to finish, but I'm very grateful to you, and thank you for sharing your expertise, and hopefully we'll talk again sometime. Noah Bookbinder.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can catch the daily 5-Minute News podcast. Find me there, and find me here next week with a brand new special guest and more factual news stories to discuss on the 5-Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.